Arthur Vance was 42 years old. For 7 of those years, he had dedicated himself to building a life with Clara Albright. He built it the way he built everything, with patience, with quiet intention, and with materials meant to last. He laid the foundation with loyalty, framed the structure with consistency, and believed he had created something that could withstand any weather. Then, on a Tuesday in October, Clara announced she was leaving him for a wealthy surgeon, a man of performative brilliance and public acclaim. The life Arthur had built for them was condemned in a single, 5-minute conversation. What Arthur did next would not be loud, it would not be fast, but it would cost them everything they thought they had gained. If you have ever felt underestimated, comment with your city or country below, and be sure to subscribe for more stories of quiet, methodical justice. Arthur's days began before the sun. At 4:45 a.m., the alarm was a formality he rarely needed. His body, conditioned by 2 decades of discipline, knew the time. The house was silent, a testament to his precision in construction: triple-paned windows, insulated interior walls, solid core doors. No sound leaked in or out. He had designed it himself, a modern structure of glass, steel, and warm cedar, cantilevered over a quiet, wooded ravine on the edge of the city. It was a house that was supposed to be a home, filled with the low hum of a shared life. Now its silence was an active presence, a weight in the air. He moved through the dark kitchen, his bare feet silent on the polished concrete floors. The coffee maker, preset the night before, gurgled to life at precisely 5 a.m. Routine was a form of architecture, a load-bearing system for the day. By 5:30 a.m., he was at his desk in his home office, a room that overlooked the ravine. The desk was a single slab of reclaimed oak, 12 feet long, and held nothing but a monitor, a keyboard, a single black moleskine notebook, and a pen. On the screen were the schematics for his latest project, a state-of-the-art pediatric oncology wing for St. Jude's Medical Center. His company, Vance Development, did not build condominiums or shopping malls. It built things that mattered, things with complex technical requirements and zero margin for error: research laboratories, data centers, and, most frequently, hospitals. He was not merely a contractor, he was a developer. He bought the land, financed the deal, oversaw the design and engineering, and then managed the construction from the first shovel of dirt to the final installation of an MRI machine. He built the containers for other people's hope and desperation. It was unglamorous work, a profession of logistics, soil reports, and supply chain management. He found a deep and abiding satisfaction in it. Clara had once found it charming, his quiet competence. She called him her rock. He was steady, predictable, a calm harbor in the turbulent world of her work as a high-end art gallery director. Her world was one of ephemeral trends, of charismatic artists, and wealthy, capricious collectors. It was a world of surfaces, of what things looked like, of the stories told about them. His world was one of foundations, of what things were, of the silent, unseen integrity that held them up. For years, the two worlds had complemented each other. He was the anchor to her kite. But slowly, imperceptibly to him at first, she began to resent the anchor. She started to see his stillness not as strength, but as a lack of ambition. His quietness was not depth, but a failure to perform. He saw the first stress fracture a year before the collapse. They were at a fundraiser for the city ballet. Clara was incandescent, moving through the crowd with an easy, practiced grace. Arthur stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of club soda, observing. He watched her talk to a group that included Dr. Julian Croft, the new chief of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Jude's. Arthur knew of him, peripherally. Croft was a name the hospital board mentioned with a certain reverence. A brilliant surgeon, a rainmaker, a man who attracted wealthy donors and international prestige. Croft was holding court, telling a story that made the group laugh. He was handsome in a severe academic way, with silvering temples and a smile that seemed both charming and dismissive. Arthur watched Clara watch him. He saw the admiration in her gaze, an intensity he had not seen directed at him in a long time. It was the look of someone seeing a shinier, more exciting future. He did not react. He did not confront her later. He simply noted it, filed it away, another piece of data in a system that was beginning to show signs of cascading failure. He registered the quiet shift in her emotional tectonics, the way a seismograph registers a tremor miles below the surface. He knew something had broken deep within the foundation of their life, but he did not yet know how to assess the damage. The conversation where she left him was an exercise in curated cruelty. She sat opposite him at the large dining table he had built with his own hands. Her expression was one of solemn, rehearsed sorrow. Her words were polished, free of any genuine emotional friction. "Arthur, this isn't easy to say," she began, the opening line of a script she had practiced for weeks. "I feel like we've grown apart. We want different things from life." He listened without interruption. He did not ask questions. He knew questions were a request for negotiation, and this was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. She spoke of needing passion, of wanting to feel a spark. She used words like vitality and dynamism. These were not her words. They were words she had borrowed from someone else, from a life she had auditioned for, and apparently been cast in. He waited for the name. He knew there was a name. A betrayal of this magnitude required a specific catalyst, not a vague sense of ennui. Finally it came. "I've met someone," she said, her eyes cast down at her perfectly manicured hands. "It's Julian Croft." She said the name with a reverence that was deeply wounding. She spoke of his mind, his ambition, the way he moved through the world. "He's the chief of surgery at St. Jude's," she added, as if Arthur might not know. "He's extraordinary." In her mind, she was contrasting the brilliant, world-renowned surgeon with the simple, quiet builder sitting across from her. She was drawing a line between the life she was choosing and the life she was abandoning. The man who saved lives versus the man who poured concrete. It was the ultimate miscalculation, an error of architectural proportions. She had spent 7 years living in a house without ever bothering to look at the blueprints. She had no idea who owned the land, who signed the checks, who held the deeds to the very stage on which her new life was set to unfold. St. Jude's Medical Center was not just a project Arthur had built, it was a project he owned. He was the silent, majority partner in the holding company that possessed the land, the buildings, the equipment, and the contracts of every single person who worked there, from the janitorial staff to the celebrated chief of cardiothoracic surgery. He had built her new world, and he was the only one who could tear it down. Arthur looked at her, at this woman who had shared his bed and his life, and felt a profound and chilling stillness settle over him. He did not feel anger, not yet. He felt the cold, clear certainty of a structural engineer who has just identified a fatal, irreparable flaw. He said nothing. He simply nodded, a small, final gesture of acknowledgement. The conversation was over. The inspection had been completed. The structure was condemned. After she was gone, the silence in the house changed. It was no longer the passive absence of sound. It was an active, ringing void. The front door clicked shut with a dead, metallic finality. Arthur sat at the dining table for another 10 minutes, his hands resting flat on the cool wood. He catalogued the sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of the HVAC system, the faint whisper of wind in the trees outside. These were the base-level acoustics of his life, now stripped of the overlay of her presence. The sound of her heels on the floor, the murmur of her voice on the phone, the rustle of pages as she read in the next room. He was an architect of spaces, and he understood how profoundly a space was altered by its occupant. The house he had designed for two was now grotesquely oversized for one. He did not get up and pour a drink. He did not sweep a glass from a table. His grief was not performative. It was a quiet, internal pressure, like hydrostatic force building against a dam. He stood, walked to the mudroom, and pulled on his work boots. They were steel-toed, scuffed, and coated in a fine layer of pale dust. He bypassed his pristine Audi in the garage and got into his work truck, a Ford F-250 that smelled of sawdust and coffee. The engine turned over with a low diesel growl. He drove not toward the city, but away from it, heading toward the industrial outskirts, where his current projects were rising from the graded earth. He pulled up to the security gate of a sprawling construction site. The sign read, "Vance Development, Project Site, Northridge Hospice and Palliative Care Center." The night watchman, a man named George he'd known for years, saw the truck and waved him through without question. Arthur parked near the skeletal frame of what would be the main residential wing. The moon was high and bright, casting long distorted shadows from the steel beams and stacks of drywall. He got out of the truck and walked into the cold, unfinished building. His boots crunched on the gravel, and debris covering the concrete slab. The air was thick with the smell of curing concrete, cut lumber, and damp earth. It was the smell of creation, of something being made from nothing. He walked the corridors that were not yet corridors, just pathways between steel studs. He ran his hand along a cold I-beam, feeling the rough, painted texture. This was his world. It was a world of tangible things, of physics and chemistry, of stress loads and tensile strength. It was a world with rules. If you built a foundation to code, it held. If you respected the properties of steel, it would not fail. If you honored the blueprints, the structure would be sound. Clara had operated without blueprints. She had built her new life on impulse and ego, on the shimmering surface of another man's reputation. Arthur knew, with the certainty of a man who understood foundations, that such a structure could not possibly bear weight. He stood in the center of what would be the chapel, a space with a high vaulted ceiling open to the night sky. And there, in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the tangible evidence of his life's work, he began his inventory. It was a mental process, a checklist he used on every project before breaking ground. What he knew, Clara was gone. She had chosen Julian Croft. They believed they were building a future together within the walls of St. Jude's Medical Center. What he did not know, the full duration of their affair, the specific promises Croft had made, the depth of Clara's self-delusion, what he controlled, the physical asset of the hospital, the legal entity that owned it, the employment contract of Dr. Julian Croft, the narrative that had yet to be written. The inventory was stark and clarifying. The emotional variables, the hurt, the betrayal, were immense, but they were not the factors that would determine the outcome. The outcome would be determined by the things he controlled. He felt the pressure in his chest ease, replaced by a cold, quiet purpose. He was no longer a victim of a collapsing relationship. He was a developer looking at a site that needed to be cleared for a new project. The demolition would have to be handled carefully, with precision and minimal collateral damage. The next morning was a Tuesday. It felt like a continuation of the day before, a seamless stretch of grey, quiet time. Arthur was in his downtown office at 5:15 a.m. The office, like his house, was a study in minimalist utility. Exposed concrete pillars, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that was more engineered than designed. From his vantage point on the 34th floor, he watched the first hints of dawn silhouette the cranes and towers of the city. He drank his black coffee and stared at the dark screen of his computer. He did not feel rushed. He felt a deliberate calm, the same feeling he had before beginning a complex concrete pour. Every variable had to be accounted for before a single action was taken. At 7 a.m., his CFO David Chen would arrive. At 7:30, his executive assistant. He had a 2-hour window of perfect solitude. He picked up his phone. He did not call his sister. He did not call a friend. He made 2 calls, each lasting less than a minute. The first was to David Chen's private mobile number. David, a man of preternatural calm and absolute discretion, answered on the second ring. "David," Arthur said, his voice level, "I need a complete file on a senior employee at St. Jude's, Dr. Julian Croft. I want everything. His original employment agreement, all amendments, compensation history, performance reviews, and all expense and discretionary fund reports since his start date. I need it sent to my personal encrypted email address. This is a level 1 priority and is to be handled by you alone." There was a brief pause on the other end. David did not ask why. He was a master of discerning the unsaid. "I'll have it for you within the hour, Arthur," he replied. The call ended. The second call was to Marcus Thorne, the head of corporate law at the firm that had represented Vance Development for 15 years. Marcus was older than Arthur, a sharp, precise man who thought in clauses and liabilities. Arthur caught him on his way into his office. "Marcus, it's Arthur Vance. Arthur." "It's early for you to be putting out fires," as Marcus said, his tone dry. "It may be a fire," Arthur replied, his voice flat. "I'm forwarding you a senior executive's employment contract for review. I need you to focus on the termination clauses, specifically for cause dismissal, and any language pertaining to professional conduct and misuse of company assets. I'll send the file as soon as I have it." "Understood," Marcus said. "I'll clear my morning." The call ended. No pleasantries, no small talk. Information was transferred. The mechanism was engaged. Less than 45 minutes later, a notification pinged on his laptop. The file from David had arrived. It was a single consolidated PDF, 187 pages long. Arthur opened it. He began to read, not with the frantic energy of a spurned lover looking for dirt, but with the methodical patience of an auditor. He scrolled past the glowing resume, the Ivy League degrees, the prestigious fellowships. He was not interested in the facade. He was interested in the foundation. He went straight to the fine print. The contract itself was a boilerplate Vance Holdings agreement, adapted for a high-level medical professional. It was ironclad, written by Marcus Thorne's best people. It contained a robust morality clause, a broad and deliberately vague section that covered actions which bring the institution into disrepute. He moved to the financials. David had compiled everything. Every expense report, every request for reimbursement, every signature on a purchase order. Arthur started at the beginning of Croft's tenure 4 years prior. For the first year, everything was immaculate. Then small irregularities began to appear. A dinner with a potential donor that coincided with his wedding anniversary. A first-class flight upgrade for a conference in Geneva, submitted with a coach fare invoice. They were small things, easily overlooked, the kind of minor abuses of privilege that executives in his position often felt entitled to. Arthur kept scrolling. The pattern became clearer, more audacious. Croft had a corporate apartment, a perk for visiting surgeons and hospital dignitaries. The logs showed he was using it several nights a week, listing late surgical consultations as the reason. He was living there, using the hospital to fund a second residence in the city. Then Arthur found the primary structural flaw. 2 years ago, Doctor. Croft had been the keynote speaker at a major medical technology conference in Berlin. He had submitted expense reports to St. Jude's for his flight, hotel, and per diem, all approved by the previous CFO who had been notoriously lax. Arthur cross-referenced the conference name and date. A quick search brought up the event's program. Dr. Julian Croft's keynote address, sponsored by a major pharmaceutical company. Keynote speakers at that level were not just compensated, they were paid handsomely, often in the range of $50,000 to $75,000, plus all expenses. Croft had double-dipped. He had billed the hospital for expenses that were already paid for, and he had pocketed a substantial speaking fee without declaring it as outside income, a clear violation of his contract. It was not just greedy, it was fraud. Arthur leaned back in his chair. The city was now fully awake, bathed in the cool light of the morning. He had found it. The hairline fracture that, under pressure, would bring the entire structure down. He attached the relevant documents and forwarded the email to Marcus Thorne. The subject line was a single word: review. The meeting took place 2 days later. Not in Arthur's office or Marcus Thorne's, but in a small, soundproof conference room in an anonymous office building downtown that Vance Development kept for sensitive negotiations. The room contained only a table, 4 chairs, and a water pitcher. It was a space stripped of power signifiers, a neutral ground where facts could be presented without distraction. Arthur and Marcus sat on one side of the table. Across from them sat David Chen. Between them on the table were 3 neat stacks of paper. Each page was clean, a black and white copy. There was no extraneous highlighting, no dramatic red circles. The evidence was designed to speak for itself, in a calm, authoritative monotone. Marcus Thorne, dressed in a perfectly tailored grey suit, spoke first. The Berlin conference is the cleanest breach. It's documented fraud. The speaking fee was wired to a personal corporation, not to him directly, but it's a transparent shell, easy to pierce. David Chen nodded, tapping a page in his own file. The corporate apartment is a flagrant violation of the hospital's housing policy. He's effectively been subsidized for a pied-à-terre for 3 years. The cost to the hospital is north of $200,000. He paused. And there's more. We found 3 instances of him publishing research in major journals where over 90% of the work, including the writing, was done by junior residents who received only a footnote acknowledgement. That's a serious ethical breach, and it violates the academic integrity clause of his agreement. Arthur listened. He had read all the files himself the night before. He absorbed the information again, letting it settle. He was looking at the situation from all angles, anticipating Croft's possible defenses. He would claim the fraud was a clerical error, He would argue the apartment was approved by prior management. He would say the residents were happy to contribute to his work. Each defense was a weak point, a potential path of resistance. Arthur's plan had to account for them, to close them off one by one, until there was no path left but the one he had chosen. He will try to negotiate, Arthur said. It was not a question. He will see this as a prelude to a settlement. He will expect us to demand repayment in exchange for his silence. Marcus nodded. It's the standard playbook. He'll have his lawyer offer a check and a non-disclosure agreement. Arthur shook his head slowly. There will be no negotiation. The finality in his voice filled the small room. David and Marcus looked at him. They had worked with him for over a decade. They knew this tone. It was the tone he used when a contractor tried to cut corners on rebar, or when an architect insisted on a design element that compromised structural integrity. It was his absolute non-negotiable voice. His contract provides for termination with cause in the event of gross misconduct, Arthur continued, his voice low and even. Fraud, ethical violations, and misappropriation of assets all qualify. We will execute that clause. There will be no severance, no settlement, and no NDA. The termination will be summary and immediate. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He'll fight it, Arthur. He'll sue for wrongful termination. It will get messy, public. Let him, Arthur replied. We will file a civil suit to claw back the funds on the same day, and we will submit a formal report of our findings to the State Medical Board. His license to practice will be in jeopardy. A public fight would be professional suicide for him. He won't do it. Arthur's logic was cold and inescapable. He was not planning a messy revenge. He was planning a controlled demolition. He would dismantle Julian Croft's career with the same dispassionate precision he would use to take down an unsafe building. He would start with the foundation, his employment, then the walls, his reputation, and finally the operating license, the roof over his entire professional life. There would be nothing left but rubble. He had built the hospital, and he would protect its integrity, even if it meant scouring a part of it clean. The decision was made, the plan was set, all that remained was the execution. The summons was delivered with bureaucratic indifference. An email arrived in Dr. Julian Croft's inbox on a Thursday afternoon. The sender was an administrative assistant from the office of the chairman of the St. Jude's Medical Holdings Board. The name of the chairman, Arthur Vance, meant nothing to him. It was just a name on an organizational chart he had never bothered to study. The email was brief and formal, requesting his presence at an urgent board-level review the following day, Friday, at 4 p.m. The location was the main hospital boardroom, a place of prestige, a room where major donations were announced and new department heads were celebrated. Croft read the email and smiled. This was it. The board was finally recognizing his value. The current chief of staff was nearing retirement. They were going to offer him the position. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for. He immediately forwarded the email to Clara, adding a single line. It's happening. Dinner at Per Se tomorrow to celebrate. The reply came back instantly. I knew it. I'm so proud of you. I'll be there with you, of course. Her presence would be a perfect accessory, a beautiful testament to his success. He felt a surge of triumph. He thought of Arthur, the quiet, unimpressive man she had left behind. A builder. Croft pictured him in a hard hat, covered in dust, and felt a wave of dismissive pity. He, Julian Croft, was a master of the universe, a man who held life and death in his hands. Arthur Vance was a man who worked with his hands. They were different species. On Friday, at 3:55 p.m., Dr. Croft and Clara Albright stood outside the polished mahogany doors of the hospital boardroom. Croft was immaculate in a dark tailored suit, the picture of authority and success. Clara stood beside him, radiant in a silk dress, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She was giddy with anticipation, imagining the life that was about to unfold, the society pages, the philanthropic galas, the recognition she craved. She was finally getting the life she deserved, with the man she deserved. Are you nervous? She whispered, squeezing his arm. He laughed, a low, confident sound. It's a formality, my love. They need me more than I need them. The door opened. A quiet woman in a simple black suit gestured for them to enter. Dr. Croft, they're ready for you. Croft strode into the room, Clara a half step behind him, and then they stopped. The room was vast and cold. The long, gleaming table was mostly empty. There were no smiling board members, no celebratory atmosphere. At the far end of the table, seated alone, was Arthur Vance. He was not wearing a suit. He was in a simple dark sweater and grey trousers. He looked like he belonged there, like the room was an extension of his own quiet stillness. Next to him, another man in a severe suit sat with a leather portfolio open before him. On the table in front of Arthur were 4 thin, identical manila folders, placed in a precise, evenly spaced row. Croft's confident stride faltered. He did not recognize Arthur at first. He was just a man out of place. Then he saw Clara freeze beside him. All the color drained from her face. Her hand, which had been gripping his arm in triumph, went slack. Her expression was a mask of pure, horrified recognition. It was in that moment that Croft understood something was terribly wrong. He looked back at the man at the end of the table, the quiet builder, the man she had left, and a cold, terrible dread began to seep into the edges of his confidence. Arthur did not stand. He did not smile. He simply gestured to the 2 empty chairs across the vast expanse of polished wood. His voice was calm, without inflection, but it carried across the silent room like a judgment. "Dr. Croft, Miss Albright, please, have a seat." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Julian Croft, a man accustomed to commanding operating rooms and lecture halls, found himself at a complete loss. He looked from Arthur to the severe man beside him, who he now recognized as Marcus Thorne, one of an army of lawyers the hospital kept on retainer. He had met him once, briefly. He looked at Clara, who was staring at Arthur with a dawning, sickening comprehension. She understood, before he did, the true architecture of power in this room. She had mistaken the surgeon's scalpel for the ultimate tool, never realizing that the man who owned the entire operating theater was the one holding all the power. Croft cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I'm sorry," he began, attempting to inject a note of professional indignation into his voice. "I was told this was a board meeting. Who are you?" Arthur did not answer. He let the question hang in the air, its arrogance exposed. It was Marcus Thorne who spoke, his voice as dry as old paper. "Dr. Croft, I am Marcus Thorne, outside counsel for St. Jude's Medical Holdings, and this is Mr. Arthur Vance, the chairman of the board and majority owner. Please sit. We have a contractual matter to review." The words owner and chairman landed like hammer blows. Croft's face, which had been a mask of confident authority, began to show the first signs of stress fractures. He sank into a chair, his movements suddenly clumsy. Clara sat beside him, rigid and silent, her eyes fixed on Arthur. Arthur slid the first folder across the polished table. It stopped perfectly in front of Croft. "This," Arthur said, his voice quiet but resonant, "is a copy of your employment agreement, which you signed 4 years ago. Please turn to page 12, section 8. Croft fumbled with the folder. His hands, the famously steady hands of a brilliant surgeon, trembled slightly. He found the page. Section 8 was titled Professional Conduct and Fiduciary Duty. Marcus Thorne began to read the clause aloud, his voice a dispassionate drone. "Employee agrees to conduct himself at all times in a manner befitting his senior position, to act in the best financial interests of the hospital, and to avoid any appearance of impropriety, conflict of interest, or professional misconduct." As Thorne spoke, Arthur slid the second folder across the table. It contained copies of the expense reports from the Berlin conference. Alongside them were bank statements from Croft's personal corporation showing the $75,000 wire transfer from the pharmaceutical sponsor and a copy of the check from the hospital reimbursing him for the same travel. The evidence was stark, irrefutable. "A clerical error," Croft stammered, his voice losing its baritone confidence. "My accountant must is a mistake." Arthur said nothing. He slid the third folder across the table. This one contained the logs for the corporate apartment, cross-referenced with his on-call schedule. It showed dozens of overnight stays on nights he was not on call, including weekends and holidays. It was paired with a copy of the hospital policy, clearly stating the apartment was for official use only. "That was approved," Croft insisted, his voice rising. "My predecessor, he said it was fine. There is no record of that approval," Thorne stated flatly. Clara watched, mute. She felt as if she were watching a building being dismantled in slow motion. The confident, powerful man she had chosen was being systematically taken apart, piece by piece, by the quiet, steady man she had discarded. She saw him not as a simple builder anymore, but as the architect of this entire terrible scene. He had planned it all. Every document, every word, was a carefully placed charge of dynamite designed to bring the structure of Julian Croft's life crashing down, and she was standing right next to it. The final folder was pushed across the table. It contained sworn, notarized affidavits from 3 surgical residents, detailing the research and articles they had written for, which Croft had taken sole credit. Their statements were precise, filled with dates, drafts, and email exchanges. This was not about money. This was about academic fraud, a sin for which there was no easy absolution. Croft stared at the pages, his face pale. The bluster was gone. The explanations had run out. There were no more defenses. He looked up at Arthur, his eyes pleading. For the first time he saw the man Clara had left, not as a rival, but as an implacable force he had foolishly, fatally underestimated. The consequences did not arrive with a thunderclap. They settled like a quiet, permanent weather front. Marcus Thorne slid one final, single sheet of paper across the table. It was not in a folder. It lay exposed, stark white against the dark wood. It was a letter. The letterhead read, Office of the Chairman, St. Jude's Medical Holdings. The letter informed Dr. Julian Croft that, effective immediately, his employment was terminated with cause, pursuant to Section 8 of his contract. It detailed the specific reasons: fraudulent expense reporting, misappropriation of hospital assets, and gross professional misconduct. Thorne explained the ramifications in a voice devoid of emotion. There would be no severance package. All unvested stock options were forfeited. The hospital's legal department would be initiating a civil action to recover the value of the apartment usage and the fraudulent reimbursements, a sum totaling over $250,000. Furthermore, as required by law and hospital policy, a full report of their findings, including the residents' affidavits concerning academic fraud, would be compiled and sent to the State Medical Licensing Board for review. His hospital privileges were, of course, revoked. Hospital security had been notified and would meet him at his office to oversee the collection of his personal effects. He was to be off the premises within the hour. Julian Croft made no sound. He simply stared at the letter, his world reduced to a single page of type. He had walked into this room as the master of his universe, the celebrated chief of surgery. He would walk out as a disgraced, unemployed man facing professional ruin and financial devastation. He turned to Clara, his face a ruin of disbelief and panic. He was looking for an ally, a witness, someone to protest this injustice. But Clara was not looking at him. Her gaze was locked on Arthur. In her eyes was the sickening soul-deep understanding of a gambler who has pushed all their chips onto the wrong number and just watched the ball land on the other side of the wheel. She had traded a mountain of solid granite for a glittering heap of sand. Arthur stood up. He had not spoken since the beginning of the meeting. He looked at Croft, not with anger or triumph, but with the dispassionate gaze of an inspector signing off on a demolition permit. Then his eyes moved to Clara. He held her gaze for a long moment. He saw her desperation, her regret, her humiliation. He saw the life she had thrown away and the ruin she had chosen. He felt nothing. The emotional structure of their relationship had been so thoroughly dismantled that there was nothing left to feel. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Marcus Thorne. Marcus will see you out, he said. His voice was not cruel. It was simply a statement of fact. Then he turned and walked out of the boardroom through a private side door, leaving them to the quiet, efficient machinery of their undoing. He did not look back. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The sharp, cold clarity of autumn gave way to the quiet grey of winter, and then to the tentative green of spring. The name Julian Croft was no longer spoken in the halls of St. Jude's. His downfall had been a quiet one. There were no press releases, no public scandals. He simply vanished from the hospital roster. Rumors circulated. A health issue, a sudden move to Europe. But the truth was buried in confidential legal filings and the sealed records of the medical board. He had not fought the termination. His lawyer had seen the evidence and advised him to disappear quietly. His license was suspended pending a full investigation. His career was over. Clara Albright disappeared as well. The gallery announced her sudden resignation to pursue other opportunities. She sold her apartment and left the city. Arthur heard from his sister that she had moved back to her parents' home in Ohio. the glittering future she'd grasped for having turned to dust in her hands. Arthur did not track their fates. He did not seek news of their ruin. His focus was, as always, on what he was building. On a bright Saturday morning in May, he stood on a small hill overlooking his latest project. It was not a hospital or a research facility. It was a public library, nestled in a working-class neighborhood that had not had one in 30 years. Advanced Development was building it pro bono, a gift to the city. The structure was nearly complete, a beautiful, modest building of warm brick and large glass windows designed to let in the light. The site was quiet today, the crews gone for the weekend. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and new paint. He wasn't looking at the building. He was watching a young family on the newly laid-to sod of the reading lawn. A father was patiently sounding out words from a picture book to his small daughter, who was listening with rapt attention. There was a fundamental decency to the scene, a simple, solid goodness that resonated with him. This was what lasted. Not prestige, not applause, not the performance of success. What lasted was the foundation, the quiet, unglamorous work of building something sound, something that served a purpose beyond ego. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The wound of Clara's betrayal had finally scarred over, leaving not bitterness, but a renewed understanding of his own core principles. He had been tested. The life he had built for himself, the one founded on discipline, integrity, and quiet work, had been subjected to a seismic event. But the foundation had held. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his sister, Eleanor. "Lunch? Mom's making lasagna." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He looked out at the library, at the family on the lawn, at the city stretching beyond, and felt a profound sense of rightness. He had cleared the damaged site, and now new construction was underway. He typed back a simple reply. On my way. He got in his truck and drove toward home, not the empty house he had once shared with Clara, but the warm, noisy one he had grown up in, a place whose foundation had never once been in doubt. If you found this story of quiet resolve satisfying, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these narratives. We have selected another story for you that we think you will appreciate, about a man who was fired by a boss who didn't realize he was the one who had secretly funded the entire company.